If you really want to understand where a country is headed, you've got to look at its education budget. And for India, well, the numbers from the last decade or so tell a pretty incredible story. It's a story with huge headlines, some really surprising paradoxes, and at its heart, a race to build a future-ready nation. Okay, let's dive right in.
So, on the surface, the headline number is just spectacular. Between 2015 and 2026, the combined budget for education and skilling in India is more than doubled, a 102% increase. I mean, that sounds like a massive, undeniable success, right?
But is it really that simple? Does one giant number ever tell the whole story? As we're about to see, the real story of India's education budget is way more complex and honestly, way more interesting than just that one headline figure.
Okay, let's start with the good news, because it is genuinely impressive. We're talking about a jump from roughly 97,000 crore rupees back in 2015 to over 1.95 lakh crore by 2026. This isn't just, keeping up with inflation, it's a real significant expansion of investment. So the big question is, where did all that new money actually go?
Well, you can see the priorities pretty clearly when you just look at the growth rates. Funding for research and innovation, or R&I, it shot up by 277%. And the budget for skilling? It grew by a staggering 352%. These weren't just small adjustments. This was a major strategic pivot.
Let's just zero in on that R&I number for a second, because it is, you could argue, the single biggest success story in this entire budget narrative. It really shows a fundamental shift in how India sees its own path forward.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting when you break down that growth. So yeah, school education still got the biggest chunk of the new funding. But look at R&I. It drove nearly a third of the entire budget increase. Even though it started as a much smaller piece of the pie, it was punching way, way above its weight. And this really illustrates that change in thinking. This quote from the source material just captures it perfectly. Research and development is no longer seen as this, nice-to-have thing for universities. It's being treated as essential national infrastructure, just like roads or power plants. Okay, so that's the good news. Now, let's get into the paradoxes, because this is where the story gets a little tricky. We've established the budget got a lot bigger, but how big was it compared to everything else? That's the real question.
And here is the first big twist in the story. So while the education budget doubled, the total government budget grew even faster. And what does that mean? It means education's actual slice of the national pie got smaller, dropping from 3.5% down to just 2.5%.
And if we zoom out even further and look at the total national spending on education, so that's combining both the central and state funds, it's basically stuck. It's just hovering at 2.9% of GDP. To put that in perspective, that's less than half of the 6% target that India's own national education policy says is what's needed.
And this leads us to two other critical gaps that are kind of hiding beneath the surface. Money that gets allocated but for some reason never actually gets spent, and some key priorities that seem to be getting left behind.
This one is pretty stark. You have the National Education Policy, which very clearly states that foundational learning for young kids is the #1 priority. But then you look at the budget, and it tells a totally different story. The share of funding for early childhood care and education, ECCE, actually went down by 5.5%. That's a huge disconnect between policy and practice. In this table here, it shows a problem that's just as serious. I mean, it's one thing to allocate money, but it's another thing to actually spend it. Just look at the numbers for state universities and the new research foundation, RUSA and ANRF. Only 48% of the money that was set aside for them was actually used. More than half of it was just left on the table.
So the real crucial point here is this. Just throwing more money at the problem isn't the solution. The real bottleneck is what the source calls implementation capacity. Basically, the ability of states and institutions to effectively absorb and spend the money they're given.
Okay, so let's circle back to that R&D success story for a minute. The output numbers are, frankly, incredible. Patent grants have gone through the roof. India's global innovation rank has jumped. I mean, surely this has to be an undeniable win, right?
Well, this might just be the most fascinating paradox of them all. This chart shows this massive divergence. On the one hand, patent grants are up an incredible 1,700%. But on the other hand, total R&D spending as a share of the economy has actually fallen by 24%. I mean, how is that even possible? How can you get so much more from so much less?
Well, the answer isn't magic, it's efficiency.
The patent office got a whole lot faster at clearing its backlog. There's something called the low base effect, which just means it's easier to get a huge percentage jump when you start from a small number. But the but here, it's a really big one. The private sector, which drives over 70% of R&D in the world's leading economies, only contributes 36% in India. So what we're seeing is efficiency gains, but not a deep structural transformation of the whole system. At least not yet.
So with all these complex issues swirling around, what does the path forward actually look like? Well, some recent policy shifts give us a clue, and they suggest a new focus is starting to emerge from all these paradoxes.
You can really see the thinking evolve on this timeline. It starts with creating a dedicated skills ministry in 2014, then streamlining school funding, then setting a really bold new vision with the NEP in 2020, and it all seems to be leading up to the launch of a massive new R&D scheme in 2025, which is a direct attempt to fix that structural gap we were just talking about.
But while India is planning for its future, the rest of the world is changing at lightning speed. This concept of a dark factory, a production line that runs completely on its own, with no people, it poses a huge challenge. The very jobs that a lot of these skilling programs are designed for are at risk of just disappearing.
And this really shows the pivot that's now required. The whole focus has to shift. It can't be about just training hands for assembly lines anymore. It has to be about nurturing minds that can design, program, and command the automated systems of the future. It's a completely different kind of skilling.
And this is what connects all the dots. The big, new investments in R&D, they're not just about economic growth anymore. They signal that India is starting to treat deep tech, we're talking semiconductors, AI, quantum computing, as a matter of national security. It's a global race that it simply cannot afford to lose.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's really a story of two halves, isn't it? On one side, you've got genuine strategic progress in these future-focused areas like R&D and skilling. But on the other side, you've got these deep, persistent challenges: stagnation in early childhood education, money that's consistently left unspent, and a shrinking slice of the overall economic pie.
Which leaves us with this final, really powerful question. Is the current approach truly building the strategic foundations India needs for 2047, its 100th year of independence? Or is it just keeping the lights on for a system that really needs a fundamental redesign? That's the real question this budget leaves us all with.